Hey guys, Jami here. Welcome back to the first podcast of 2021. We started off this year on a bit of a rocky beginning with what happened in the US Capitol recently, but I'm going to try and stay positive. So I'm here with Talia. Hi, Talia. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for coming on the podcast and thanks for being the first guest of 2021. It's really exciting.
Yay! Start the new off year well.
Yeah, well, we took a bit of a break over the break to kind of rest, rejuvenate. I think a lot of people did. So we're back. And I love the subject that we're talking about today because we're talking about food and kind of our relationship with food as spoonies, as people with chronic illness. And it's relevant because I think a lot of people go into the new year thinking new year, new me, exercise, diet, etc. Even people in the chronic illness community. How do you feel about that?
I don't like it.
You don't like it? Why don't you like it?
I don't like it. I think, putting pressure on ourselves, especially when we attach sort of healthy people's pressure onto our daily life. Our daily life is not like healthy people. So when we set goals, our goals have to be set differently, not necessarily less, just differently. And so I think, starting the diets and doing all of that on January 1st, if you're going to do something like that, just start it that day, and sort of attaching it to a calendar doesn't make sense to me. And
Yeah.
The whole New Year's resolution thing, our lives are so unpredictable with chronic illness. I don't know where I'm going to be at in a week, much less in 12 months with my illness. So it's just setting ourselves up for failure, I feel, and we don't need that. We definitely don't need that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can kind of I agree with that. But coming back to what you said originally is like it's good to set goals, but we need to set them differently. What do you mean by that? What does that look like, at least for you and maybe for someone in the community?
Well, for example, right now, a lot of people are setting exercise goals, which I think are amazing, but I see these commercials on TV and all these apps that come up and they say, okay, we're going to run half a mile today, and that's to start. I don't think I could run a half a mile if I worked up to it over 2 years. It's just not possible. So there aren't things out there necessarily set up for us. So it's more of saying, I'm going to stretch for 5 minutes twice a week if I'm not having a flare, and just being more realistic and not seeing it as a failure, but actually setting yourself up to be successful by being realistic.
Yeah, I love that. I was on Instagram, one of my good friends, Jess from House of Spoons. I don't know if you follow her. She mentioned something about how she's setting goals, and I think it's for 2021. But she said how she used to set these unrealistic goals and then would feel guilty and disappointed. But she said, I actually am going to start to set goals that I know I can achieve, so that when I do achieve them, I feel satisfied and that they're realistic. And I think that also does something to the brain, is when you are hitting goals, you're rewarding yourself mentally and emotionally.
Right.
Maybe then you can actually achieve that previous goal that was previously unrealistic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes along the lines of positive self-talk, which is really important. It's something that is part of cognitive behavioral therapy, where you literally affirm yourself in your mind. You tell yourself, I am worthy, I am capable. And if you say it enough, you really start to believe it. And that goes along with setting goals. I am capable of achieving this goal. But when doing that, being realistic, then you're reaffirming all those things about yourself that you want to believe, that you somewhere do believe, that you are worthy, that you are capable. But holding ourselves up against healthy people is just not a way to do
it. Yeah. Word. Not the way. I love that. And I guess back to our original topic, I kind of went on a bit of a rabbit trail there, but I wanted to chat with you about our relationship with food, because it's such a massive part of our lives, whether you are someone with a chronic illness or someone without a chronic illness. And I've found, at least in my journey, and I think a lot of people as well, our relationship with food is kind of complicated because of flare-ups when you eat certain things. A lot of times, like, I'll eat something that I normally be fine, but I flare up, or I can't eat things that normally wouldn't make me be fine some other days, and it really depends. And I have like a whole list of intolerances, which brings not only like challenges with cooking, but also challenges with going out to eat and reminding friends that I have these intolerances, and a whole range of sort of challenges that come with being a spoonie and food and eating and all of that. So, what are your thoughts around that? How do you manage your relationship with food as a spoonie?
So for me, food is my motivating factor in life. It's the thing that makes me happy. It's the thing that just it's a emotional release for me. And I don't mean in the sense of like eating my emotions, but cooking itself has gotten me through really hard times. I think back of when I was in college and doing an internship and working and all this stuff all at once and barely had any time. And I would bake to deal with my stress, which I didn't know then the stress was making me sicker. Um,
Yeah.
so it was my outlet in the sense that I had, when you bake, you can't focus on anything but the food in front of you. There's just, if you don't, you'll end up with a flat cake or, whatever. You have to put everything aside and just focus on what's in front of you. And for me, that's a challenge. My brain is in 10 different places and I've got 6 lists on my wall. And, I have a hard time just being in the moment. And cooking for me has done that. When it comes to how it affects my illness, it's been really important to me to be very like research based and not things I've seen on Facebook or other people claiming that this helps. Maybe it helps them, but really trying to stick with the science and
Yeah.
work with my doctors. I think that, going from a place that is science based is the only way that we'll be successful.
Okay. And so, when you say science based, can you give an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, like, for example, a lot of people will message me and say, oh, you should stop eating gluten. It cures your fibromyalgia. And the truth of the matter is that the science does not show that yet. And in reality, a lot of people actually have concurrent illnesses where the gluten is flaring that illness and therefore that flares the fibromyalgia, especially
Yeah.
if you have secondary fibromyalgia, meaning that it's a symptom of a different illness. So it's not a one size fits all. And the only
For
research.
you, that doesn't affect
No.
your health at
I
all.
love
Okay.
gluten. I absolutely love it. So I think, the only research that has been pretty clear is that the idea of, they don't really call it the Mediterranean diet, but it's somewhat the same as the Mediterranean diet: healthy fats, low starches, lots of fruits and vegetables, has been shown to be somewhat effective. There's a study out of Cambridge University that did a really great job explaining all of that. So I think, making sure that, say you hear something from somebody, oh, gluten's going to help me, that you go to your doctor and you talk to them about it and you get the celiacs test, and before you make these huge life changes that are really hard to keep up with. If you decide you're going to cut gluten out of your life on a whim, it's expensive. It's not easy. You may be lacking other nutrients in doing that. So talking to your doctor is the most important part of addressing food when it has to do with your illness.
Yeah, I love that. You make a really good point. I actually saw an Instagram post recently from someone who has IBS in the UK, one of my favorite accounts, IBS Fighter. And she has mentioned in her account that stress triggers her IBS. And the stress of trying to cater to all of these dietary restrictions actually is worse for her IBS than just eating the food and enjoying it.
Yeah.
And I thought
and
that
dealing
was,
with it.
I think that's kind of what you're trying to say is like, it's almost like sometimes we put ourselves in these really stressful situations of like, I have all of these restrictions, which creates stress, which then makes the symptoms of our illness worse.
Yeah.
I know for me, I definitely got tested for intolerances, and I had a wide range of intolerances, which in gluten included dairy, soy, all of these things. And that was at my worst with chronic fatigue. And I've since been able to introduce some foods back in and hopefully more in the future. But it is stressful. The bottom line is it's stressful. And I think as well for some spoonies that like aren't necessarily fit into the society's norm of what a healthy body looks like,
Right.
which I want to be really careful around that language, right? Because I have personally felt like I've been kind of overweight. And then I got chronic fatigue syndrome. And at some point, it's like, oh, it's this challenge because I'm not necessarily getting all the nutrients I need because I can
Right.
only eat certain foods, and then
Yeah.
stressful cooking. And then I'm also like, feel bad about myself because I don't look like I want to look like.
Right.
It's such a mental battle.
Well, and then you throw in medications and those side effects and, nausea. Some of them have weight gain as part of it. And it feels impossible to manage. But if the end goal is to have nothing to manage, to be completely cured and healthy and all of that, then yeah, it's going to feel impossible to manage. But again, going back to what we first said, if your goals are set smaller, then things become more manageable. And when we're talking about just making these decisions around food for ourselves, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience, but I've heard other people that they've gone into their doctor and said, well, I stopped eating gluten and soy and all these different things. And the doctor looked at them and was sort of, why? You don't need to. That doesn't affect the illness that you have. Well, I read it online.
Yeah.
So again, it's why are we setting ourselves up for these challenges without all the information first? We sometimes make it harder on ourselves without doing the work ahead of time, to make sure that we're doing it right instead of right now.
Yes, exactly. I think that's a really good point. So I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate here because I have found in my journey that doctors often don't have the answers, and I've had to find the answers myself online. So I'm not like having an opinion, but I'm actually just curious, like research based, yes, but for example, I went to a Western medicine doctor in the US, and I told her I got diagnosed from a naturopath that I had candida and chronic fatigue syndrome. I told her both of these things, and she said to me, "We don't really believe in that." So, and that's obviously like different. Not all doctors are like that. And
No.
so that's one issue in itself.
Yeah.
And the other kind of question is like, I had to go do the research on my own. I had to advocate for myself. I had to look up online the things that I couldn't eat because of candida, or which the information on that is even kind of spotty. And yes, I did see a naturopath at the same time that really helped walk me through that journey, which was awesome, but also expensive. So I don't know, what's the balance? Or is there a balance? Or are you more like just research, like it has to be backed by research?
No, because we have intuition and we
Yeah.
have to follow our intuition. And especially as women, we have very strong
Yeah,
intuition.
that's true.
And a skill is learning and to listen to that intuition. But I think what I'm sort of trying to help steer away from is this sort of confirmation bias, where
Yeah,
you already
for sure.
believe something and you go online and you find something that confirms that. Meanwhile, if you have an illness, say you have an autoimmune disease, that's getting worse as you're doing these other things because you haven't seen a physician.
Yeah.
And trust me, getting sick at 15 and before there was even, you know, I didn't know the name of my illness for another 7 years after that, I have had my share of doctors who have made me cry, who
Yeah.
gaslighted me, who called me a hypochondriac, who said that my mom had Munchausen by proxy, all these different things. So I understand it. And I was a medical social worker for a while. So I have seen the way that physicians can be with patients and
Yeah.
just screaming in my head. But I think there's a balance. And I think, you know,
Yep.
in being insistent, like you said, advocating for yourself, preparing for your doctor's appointments with everything that you found and going through it one by one with a physician and have them tell you why they disagree. I think that's important. And I think the more information that you have when you go in to talk to a doctor, the better, because I
Yeah.
can guarantee you they spend 2 minutes prepping for your appointment. So
Oh yeah.
you have it on your side.
I've had doctors like look up something like my condition and then show me Google and be like, here's what you have.
What?
Yes.
I would
It was,
walk out
I know, I was
right
so
away.
annoyed. Like, because it was with my ankle and he just pulled up Google and he's like, I think he wanted to like show me images and stuff. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm also a bit
Right.
like, it's a bit sus.
Yeah,
Um,
we're a lot more patient than we have, you know, than we should be. We are a lot more patient with these physicians than I really would like to be.
yeah, totally. And so, yeah, back to what you were saying about evidence-based. How do you, I love that actually. And I've recently started studying and they harp on like making sure that you get scholarly articles as
Yep.
sources and all of that. I haven't
Yep.
studied in years, so it's not something that was super on my radar.
Right.
How do people find evidence, like proper evidence-based articles on different things? How do you do your research?
So, from being a social worker, going to school for social work, we were required to take classes literally on research and
Oh,
how to do
wow.
that appropriately and in preparation for writing your thesis and all of that. Um, and then when I was a medical social worker, again, we had to be able to justify what we were saying to the team that we were working with. I worked at a children's hospital, so the standard was higher than ever because you're working with children. So when I
Yeah.
was sitting at a table with a bunch of physicians and I was a social worker on the case, I had to be able to say, no, this is why I believe this and show them the proof.
Okay.
So on my website, I have a bunch of links to different places where you can find scholarly articles. PubMed is a great one. I look at a lot of things from the NIH which is the American National Institutes of Health. They do a really good job of taking the scholarly articles, which I'm sure you know are very dry, and they've got a lot
Yes.
of stats and things like that. And citing them, but rewriting it in a way that is like reading a blog post or something like that.
Okay.
So those are really helpful. And also just, you know, talking again, if you have a neurologist you love, or you have a rheumatologist or whatever type of physician that you have to see for your illness, ask them, where do you go? Because most places that they go are accessible to the public. Some of them they have to pay for, but a lot of them are available to all of us. So it helps if you're reading what they're reading, or vice versa. I have printed out studies before and brought them in, and
Wow.
my neurologist, that was the first time that they had seen that. So
I love
I did the
Queen.
yeah, I'll wait while you read, okay?
Yeah. I love that so much. I can picture you just walking in and slapping it down and being like, here's the research.
Oh, there you go. But it's I mean, nobody's going to advocate for me but myself, unless you're a kid and you have a parent who's helping you out. And when I was a social worker, I was the one advocating for my clients. And so all of a
Yeah.
sudden I was the client for myself. So I had to think about, what are the things that I would tell my clients to do? Okay, I need to start doing those things now.
Yes, I love that. And I also use Google Scholar as well. I don't know, do
Okay.
you use Google Scholar much?
Yeah, I haven't used it much, no.
Okay. I don't
But I
know
think it
as
links into PubMed and some of those other ones.
yeah.
I
So
think it's more
Google
like a forum.
Scholar is like Google for scholarly articles, essentially, which is hence the
Nice.
name. So you can look up, you can research, like, say fibromyalgia, come up with all of these scholarly articles, and you can't access all of them because some of them you have to pay for, but usually
Right.
there's a wide range of like different things. And also, you would probably recommend this as well, trying to find more recent research. So like
Yes.
from maybe 2010 onwards or
Mhm.
2015 onwards is
Right.
something I would suggest, because new research is always being developed on these sorts of conditions. And sometimes what you find 20 years ago is opposite to what you find now as well.
Right. And I think also just learning to read the abstract, which is the basically like the introduction and summarizes the whole study for people who don't want to sit and read the whole study. There's a section called the abstract at the very beginning.
Yeah.
That gives you basically an overview of the entire study, and that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the research is really important. And it's something I think that I'm even realizing now, just in general, with a lot of false news that's spreading in
Yep.
politics, even
Yep.
in health circles. It's so important to know your sources when you're spreading information, when you're reading information. False information is so rampant on the internet right now, even in the health community. So anyone listening, like, highly recommend doing your research, getting educated, because I've had people even slide into my DMs and be like, because I mentioned at one point that I wanted to introduce some foods back into my diet, like dairy and eggs and all of that. And someone was like, well, you know that those are bad for you and inflammatory, and they hurt your nervous system or whatever. And I was just like, you know what? Like, everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually not backed up by research.
Yeah.
So
It's hard to say to people sometimes.
yeah, well, I think I just, because with chronic hope, I mean, I obviously am personally have my own opinions about a lot of things. I do try, and what I try to do and what we try to do as an organization is spread information and different perspectives.
Right.
So I might not agree with what someone says who comes on the podcast, but that's okay, because everyone has different viewpoints.
Right.
But I do have an issue when it's not backed up by research as well, or like you're just spreading information and saying this is best for everybody. That's what I have an issue with.
Exactly. And when you're talking about like autoimmune illnesses and, like fibromyalgia, my fibromyalgia is not this person's fibromyalgia. Certain illnesses even just show up differently person to person, the same illness. So when we're making recommendations, we can say this works for me if you want to try it. I think what gets sort of our backs up is when people are sort of like, you are doing this wrong, you need to do it this way, which on top of being not being research based, is already frustrating. So I think
Yeah.
it's also how sometimes we talk to other spoonies with the best of intentions, but I think we just have to be aware of how we do it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, no hate to anyone. It's just we all just need to be really conscious of how we talk to each other. And it sounds like, I don't know, maybe lame, but it's like love, peace, grace, like patience. It's
Right.
basic. And I'm not perfect, so don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's just one of those things. And I think evidence based is so important. And I also just want to play a little bit devil's advocate again, in the sense that, like, for example, research will say that, for example, cold water swimming is really great for you. That's pretty well known and well backed up that cold water swimming is good. Works for me. I do winter swimming. I chatted with someone else who he tried it and he had a massive flare up.
I would
So,
too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Even then, it's like, yes, research shows that it can be helpful, but it's not helpful for everyone. It
But
makes it worse for everyone, some
the
people.
key word you just said is it can be helpful.
Yeah.
So, it's also looking at it from a broader perspective that these things have helped some people. where there are things that have helped no people and we need to stop spreading those things, you
Yes.
know, or have harmed people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's all about sort of taking it in on a from a broad viewpoint. You know, yes, that could help some people and I'm stoked for them. I'm so happy for them. But when I say that it doesn't help me, let's not push, you know. And I think that's part of like being a good spoonie you know, community to each other and also like allies for
Yeah.
us is sort of hearing us when we say that, you know, I'm glad that worked for you. It doesn't work for me. And let's move on.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And it's so important as spoonies that we do some self-reflection and be like, how can I be the best ally to this person? And
Right.
that's something that I'm even working on, is like, we're all trying to build our platforms. How can we support each other to build those platforms, to build this community, so that then we can have a voice together and it's not one person more than the other.
Yes.
It's raising everyone's voices.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, switching gears a little bit back to food, which is our original topic.
We're going to think about that.
I love going on these tangents though.
Yeah.
How do you manage food prep as a spoonie? And I mean, even, or what do you recommend as someone that's like a working full-time, working professional, working full-time,
Right.
part-time, needing to food prep with chronic illness or
Yes.
needing to manage food? How do you manage that?
Well, I learned from the best. So my mom, you know, was a recent immigrant to this country. She was raising two American born kids, my brother and I, and working full time, plus getting her bachelor's and her master's degree, and carting us around to all of our sports and, you know, all of those things while still making sure that we ate and we ate healthy on a
Oh,
shoestring budget. Um, yeah, she's kind of a superwoman. And so I
moms.
learned from her, I know, right? I learned from her sort of how to be resourceful when it comes to food. I there's this new show on Netflix, and my husband and I have been joking that I'd be so good at it. That it's about taking leftovers and turning them into like these beautiful meals. I
I
can't remember
love
what it's
that.
called, but like, you know, we are by nature as spoonies resourceful people. Like we've had to be in order to
Yeah.
survive and make it to the next day. So when it comes to food, you know, the I eat very healthy, but I also believe that moderation and everything. So I will never turn down a good piece of cake. I don't care when it is. Um, so I believe in definitely doing things by moderation, but the way that I plan my meals typically is I start with a protein. And usually my protein is, you know, say 30-40% of my meal. And then my vegetables, I try to have it be double that. And then any kind of carbs or starches, I have to, you know, just the little bit of percentage, 10-15% of my meal. And when I'm doing that as a spoonie, I plan every week, and I never know how I'm going to feel. Say I'm planning my meals on Sunday. I don't know how I'm going to feel on Wednesday. So I always have at least, you know, 3 really easy meals that I can just throw together if I'm not feeling well. And I always have meals in the freezer in case I'm really not feeling well and
Yeah.
all I can do is hit start on the microwave. Um, so what I like to do is when I am feeling well is I'm going to make something for dinner, and it's just my husband and I. So I will make enough for say 6 people. And then because it's not hard when you're already cooking something to just
Yeah.
increase the volume, and I'll freeze it. And so my freezer it's a little scary when you open it because it's so jam packed. But there's always something that if I have to, there's a healthy option there, because
That's great.
eating something quick is going to make me feel worse when I'm having a flare. You know, if I order food from the Mexican place down the street, it's going to make my flare last longer, unfortunately. Um, so doing things like that. And also, you know, there wasn't this word back then, but I was basically raised flexitarian, where we didn't eat a lot of meat and it was mostly vegetables and beans and things like that. Um, for us, it was because it was like, too expensive.
Yeah.
But as I got older, I realized that, you know, with my illness, it's so much easier for me to have, a package of tempeh in the fridge that you can do anything you want with it. It's so much easier than tofu, which is a serious pain in the ass, and kind of gross sometimes if you don't do it right. But a pack of tempeh, the expiration from when you buy it is months. So I always have a healthy, inexpensive protein source there that I can throw some sauce on it. I can, put it into a soup. I can do whatever. So having a lot of options that last a long time, fresh meat, if I buy it on Monday and I end up having a flare for a week and a half, now I have to throw that away. So just sort of,
Yeah.
again, being realistic in what I may or may not be capable of doing. If I'm feeling better on any given day, then great. But if I'm not going hungry or eating something that's going to make me even worse.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't been really great about food lately. I'm getting there because I lived in an apartment where the fridge was like so small, so I just got the
Yeah.
same thing every week. So I wasn't
Right.
getting any variety. We got a new fridge, which is awesome. But one of the things that I did when I had chronic fatigue syndrome pretty bad when I was in the US is I think it was Saturday it was usually Saturday, I'd sit down with a Pinterest board of all of
Nice.
these recipes that I knew I could eat. And I would meal plan. I would say, okay, this is what I'm going to eat Monday. This is what I'm going to eat Tuesday. And then I would write out all the ingredients. I'd go to the shops and get all the food. And it was just there. And it was making sure as well that I had some variety in my diet.
Yes.
Especially because I had such a limited diet. It was like no beans, no soy, no I was paleo for a while. No sugar, no fruit. It was like I was eating broccoli, potatoes and meat for like a while. But I was able to do that and start to get some variety in. Another thing that I am actually starting, and I'll let everyone know how it goes. I've just ordered HelloFresh.
Oh, no,
Which
you
is
guys have that out there.
Yeah, we do. I just started to do that because I've been needing to get variety in my diet. I'm not doing it myself, and I realized, look, this is a limitation for me. I
Yeah.
don't have time to meal plan and make sure I'm getting variety, so I'm gonna try HelloFresh. I think that's a great option for a spoonie, for example,
Yes.
who enjoys cooking, has the energy to cook, but doesn't necessarily have the energy to plan or go to the shops and all of that.
Look, we make things way harder for ourselves than it needs to be. And this is going to sound a little bit, I don't know, crazy to you probably, but this is a great time to be a spoonie. This is a great time in
Right?
history to be a spoonie because we have grocery delivery. And affordable
Yes.
now, but it used to be something that was only available to the wealthy. We have grocery delivery. We have Target delivers right to your door. For me to lift a bag of cat litter is hell. I can have it dropped right at my door now. So if there's things like HelloFresh, or I use Imperfect Produce, if there's things like that that are available, there's no failure in that.
Yeah.
We don't have to live up to this high expectation, that in order to be healthy, it means being 100% vegan, organic. It's also very expensive, and a lot of us can't work. And we have to think about that as well, is taking advantage of what's available to us now. Because a lot of these things weren't available even 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's even what you're saying about it being affordable is I realize that the cost of buying all of these really healthy foods actually ends
Right.
up being the same as getting HelloFresh or maybe a little bit less, but the time that I save and the mental energy, et cetera, et cetera.
And
I
the
don't know.
waste,
In the
right?
waste. And that's another thing that I considered as well is actually HelloFresh. There's been some research and studies done around this is it actually produces less waste because
Yeah.
you get exactly what you need.
Yep. Yep.
And it's packaged in a way that it actually uses less packaging and all of that. So
But also we just waste food in general, and then you add in the fact that your body's unpredictable and the meals that you planned you may not get to that week. and food goes bad, you know? And
Yeah.
so it, there's, again, it's just taking advantage of what's out there, because even though it may seem, I don't know, extravagant to have groceries delivered or HelloFresh or any of these things, it may seem eccentric. It's really taking care of yourself. I mean, we put all
Yeah.
these posts of bubble baths, you know, self-care. That's self-care.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point because I have been criticized before for shopping at like the health food store or that sort of thing because it's not cheap. And I'm
Right.
just like, yeah, I don't have a lot of money, but I also value healthy food. I also value shopping somewhere where they have sustainable practices, where they
Right.
source locally. And yes, it's more expensive. And yes, you can get the same thing cheaper at our major supermarkets, which are Kohl's and
Right.
Woolworths. But the satisfaction that I get from leaving the health food store with a box instead of like plastic bags, a
Right.
box full of produce, things that I can eat is like so worth it, like for the
Right.
extra money. I don't know
But
if you
that's
find
not
that.
to say that if you, like, for example, here in the US, if you can only shop at Food for Less or
Yes.
Walmart, or, you know, there are, if you're looking at the environment, there's things you can do. And everybody knows those things that they can do, that they can, you know, bring their own bags and, you know, do all these different things. But when we're talking about just specifically being able to eat healthy, this is again why I say it's a great time to be a spoonie, is places like Walmart have, you know, healthy vegan options now in their
Yeah,
refrigerated section. Target does, you know, so it's not an all or nothing. It's not a you only shop at Whole Foods
of
or
course.
failure. There's a lot of options now that weren't there just a few years ago. And my husband and I, we take our RV across the country. When he was a traveler at the hospitals, we would go from assignment to assignment. And so I've been to all the local grocery stores in the middle of the country and all of that. And it is really hard sometimes to find some fresh vegetables in the middle of the
Yeah.
country. Um, but the great thing is that what is accessible to everybody can be also spoonie friendly. Like, for example, I can't remember which state we were in. Maybe it was Oklahoma, or I don't remember, somewhere. And we were stopping to load up on groceries, and the section for the produce was kind of like the, I don't know, the cold drink section of any other store, you know, so
Wow.
very tiny. And a lot of the stuff was old and had been there for a while and very expensive. So then I went and I looked at like the bagged salads. Was there anything there? And they didn't have any other than iceberg lettuce, which has no nutritional value.
Yeah.
And so I, you know, go to the frozen aisle, and we have to remember that frozen things are frozen at their best, so they're actually often better quality and have more nutrients. And things like frozen cauliflower rice, I mean, I probably have 4 bags of it in my freezer right now. Like, we eat
Yeah.
it twice a week at least. Frozen broccoli, you can roast it just like you would regular broccoli.
Okay.
And it's done, it's ready to go, it's cut up for you, and it's at its most has its most nutritional value. So, you know, even though our goal may be to shop at the health food store, um, and do what's environmentally best, if we don't have that option, which a lot of people don't, there are still lots of options available to you.
Yeah. I love that actually. And thanks for bringing that up because not everyone has that option, even,
Right.
if you're out in the middle of nowhere or you can't afford it. There's been so many years where I couldn't. And I love that. And so when you say there's so many options, how do people find those options? How do you recommend going about like do you have information on your website
I
or
do. I do have some stuff on my. I have recipes on my website that I've slowly, finally started to put them up. You know, people will message me, "Hey, what's the recipe for that you posted?" And so finally, I was kind of like, "Oh, maybe I should put those on my site." So they're slowly starting to come up. But I put on my Instagram. I post a lot of things of sort of techniques of how I've cooked things or recommendations why I love certain products. Recently, I put something up about tempeh because I think it's such a spoonie friendly food. So yeah, you can find it there. I also just sort of look for, if I find something in the freezer aisle, like, I don't know, one day I saw edamame and I was like, oh, that sounds good. And I will sort of reverse engineer, and I will go and I'll look up like inexpensive uses for edamame, and I found like edamame hummus and edamame salad. And so it's really, again, using that resourcefulness that we have as spoonies to sort of reverse engineer meals based on whatever you have in your freezer or something you see on sale. Just being creative.
Well, and you make a good point as well, because sometimes like things that are on sale, like produce and stuff, it's stuff that's in season, which is actually, it's really healthy to be eating in season fruits and vegetables. They're at peak nutritional value. And so say you see like a squash on sale in the fall or autumn, and you're like, what do I do with the squash? Well, I can do all of these things. I can do some research around like how to cook squash easily, etc. One of my favorite things to eat is spaghetti squash.
Yes. Oh
Which
my gosh.
it's actually
Yes.
so hard to find in Australia, and most
Really?
Aussies don't know about it. It's actually like the best thing.
Oh, yeah. I just made, do you know what Filipino pancit is?
I don't know.
It's kind of like, I mean, this is going to offend anyone who's Filipino, but I don't know how to explain. It's kind of like chow mein, but better. But I made it with spaghetti squash, and it's, I mean, anything you would do pasta, basically, or
Yeah,
any kind of
exactly.
noodle.
And for those that don't know what spaghetti squash is, it's like this type of squash or pumpkin if you're Australian that you can, it's basically spaghetti
Strand.
almost. It's
Yeah.
strands of pumpkin or squash that you can literally just scoop out. It's actually crazy. Look it up on Google.
Well, and if you have access to it and you can get a bunch, because obviously right now over here is the good time of year for it, you can roast it, take it off the shell and freeze it for later on in the year, and it defrosts wonderfully.
Yeah, I love that pro tip from the food spoonie expert.
Yeah, right.
I love that. Well, on that note, you said you have your Instagram, your website. We'll put that all in the show notes. What can you maybe recommend that at the moment that I mean, any recommendations? What are you watching? What are you reading? What is your vibe of the moment?
So I was thinking about this, like, what am I watching? What am I reading? I mean, my husband and I think for the third time in a row, are watching the Great British Bake Off. So that's nice.
Love that.
And if you see my Instagram, we basically spend all weekend baking. So it's kind of a pandemic friendly date. But I was thinking about what I'm reading. So I just finished, it's actually, I have it right here. I just finished this book. Can you see it? It's called Cherry.
Yeah. Cherry by Mary Carr.
Yeah. So she wrote The Liars Club, which was, I think it was like in the, I could be wrong, but I think it was like the late 90s. So anyway, so she wrote The Liars Club, which was sort of the reemergence of the memoir back in the 90s and sort of set the gold standard. And I really am not, I've just never been a fan of like self-help books. I feel like, I don't know, I just personally have not gotten anything out of them. So I like to read biographies and memoirs and personal stories that are nonfiction to learn from them. And so her books really, they call it like a coming of age in the 70s, but there's, if you'll humor me, there's a line in here that just, this will make sense to you. She's talking to her friend Meredith, and she says, what is it about suffering that makes people like us so different? And Meredith says, it teaches you about the human heart. Suffering and despair force you to plumb the depths of the human heart in a way normal life can't. It makes us wise beyond our years, and most people just go along. No one has placed any sword to your shoulder to appoint you to a legion of honor, those who've suffered. Yet the notion lends you a new kind of dignity. And she's talking about, I know, right?
Tissues.
Right. She's talking about growing up in a dysfunctional household with an alcoholic and, all of this. But I think, as spoonies, we do a lot of silent suffering. Now, luckily, we're allowed to be more vocal about it and have this community. but I like to take these stories that have nothing to do with illness and sort of take these lessons out of them that I can apply to my own experiences and my own life going forward. And especially because obviously with a memoir, the person's come to the end of the story in their life and they made it. So
Yeah.
reading these stories really gives me hope, and also gives me new tools to add to my toolbox. There's that resourceful, kind of need again. So yeah, so that's when I just finished. And then I just started this gigantic beast of a book, which I didn't know when I ordered it. It's like a Bible. Like
Wow, that's
I
massive.
have a hard time holding it up in bed when I'm reading. But it's called No Ordinary Time, and it's by this historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and it's about President Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, and the way that they dealt with things in the US while World War II was going on. But it touches a lot on his disability
Wow.
and, how he coped, and didn't let it bring him down, and the process he went through to accept that he wasn't going to be able to walk again.
Yeah.
Um, and also it gives a lot of perspective from the people around him and how they saw his process. So for me, this is how I learn. This is
I
how
love
I
that.
cope. But yeah, I just for me, that's just a better way to go than the self-help books. I feel like I end up throwing them out the window in frustration.
Yeah, I'm not a self-help book person either. So yeah, I think stories, or at least for me, I like to just watch videos and experiences. I read, but it's fantasy. So that's my guilty pleasure.
Nice. But then you don't have to think about anything in the real world, which is
Exactly.
so important to be able to check out. We
Yeah.
have to be able to check out.
Yeah, especially because I don't watch TV or Netflix or anything because I don't
Right.
like it. So it's fantasy is my getaway.
Nice.
Um, One last question for you before. Usually we do this at the beginning of the podcast, but we just got straight into it. What is your pet peeve?
Okay, so my pet peeve is pandemic related.
Okay.
So when it all first started, my husband scrubs into cases all day, every day at the hospital. So obviously he knows how to wear a mask and all of that. So when he first started walking me through how I need to wear my mask, just was very clear, like make sure your nose is covered, because not only can you pass it on that way, but you can get the virus through your nasal passages as well.
Okay.
So we started seeing people with their noses out, and we came up with this joke that their willies are hanging out. So it's like having your pants down below and just letting
Yeah.
it be out. It's kind of pointless at that point, to wear pants. So it's
Right.
pointless to wear a mask. So when we're walking, because of my immune system, we're obviously always on high alert, like who's around. And so when we see somebody out in public, we'll say, hey, there's a willy over there, in order to alert the other person, like walk away, turn around, get away from
That's
them,
so
kind of thing.
funny.
So so my pet peeve is people having their willies hanging out of their masks.
I love that. That's
I'm gonna get
pretty
a shirt made
cheeky.
of that.
Yeah, literally. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast, first podcast of 2021. I am so excited to release this episode. Thanks so much for your time, such good insights, and just a good conversation, a good kind of conversation around sharing opinions about food, about life as a spoonie. And I'm so excited for whatever is ahead of you in your own journey and in
Thank
your
you.
own what you're building in your own platform.
Thank you.